It's that time of year again when 50 million American men gear up for another season of fantasy football. Now, fantasy football might seem like something that's fun, that's strategic. Perhaps it even gives you a sense of control and power. But in reality, the clue is in the name. It's just another fantasy. Much like video games, adult entertainment, and alcohol that keeps men stuck in a trap. And ultimately, fantasy sports are just an escape from your true sense of purpose. And right now, we have a generation of men who are more interested in the stats of other men's accomplishments than building their own dreams and crafting their own legacy. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at why men love fantasy football, the problem with fantasy football, and then what to do instead with your free time. Hello, my name is James, and I am on a mission to create a generation of gentlemen. So, why do so many men love fantasy football? Well, it first gives them a false sense of control, power, strategy, and status. Fantasy football is like being the owner / coach / manager of your own team, and it's easy to see why doing that in real life would be highly exciting. The percentage of men who will ever actually get to be involved in professional sports in the real world is absolutely tiny, yet we all know how much people love watching them. So to be involved in fantasy football is kind of like this middle ground where you feel like you're involved and you feel like you're an active player, but of course you're not really. And I believe the reason why this is so appealing to so many men is because in real life they actually feel quite powerless. In reality, they don't feel like they have statistics that are important to them. They don't have people to manage. They don't have a goal to work toward in the same way that a sports team does. But mastering the skill of fantasy football, if there is that much skill to it, it's an empty form of mastery. And ultimately, you're working towards something that will bring you no real-life returns or rewards. The competitive spirit that emerges from fantasy football is actually very good. I think it's very healthy and it's very masculine, but it's masculinity misapplied. Taking all of that energy, all of those resources, all of that competitive spirit and emotional involvement, intellectual involvement, and then throwing it in a direction that it delivers no fruitful returns. So competing in imaginary leagues, instead of taking all of that effort and competing in real life, in my opinion, that's the real tragedy of fantasy football. But I will say one positive thing about fantasy football, okay? It does give men a sense of brotherhood and belonging, especially on draft day. People get together at each other's houses, they see each other for the first time, it brings friends together, it brings co-workers together, it even brings families together. I think that's incredibly positive. But what's not positive is the hours that are spent then every week, often alone or glued to the phone, glued to the TV screen because of fantasy football. So my advice is go and do the real life involvement, maybe even go to the draft party, watch it together, enjoy that moment, but don't get involved in everything else. But really, fantasy leagues offer this sense of camaraderie, connection, and competition that in today's world is increasingly rare. So I completely understand that why men would be so attracted to this outlet. Men are hardwired to crave this feeling of connectedness, this feeling of competition. And in today's isolated world, it's incredibly hard to find. But let's see maybe later in the video if we can find it anywhere else. So what is the problem with fantasy football and why am I so against men taking part in it? There are 4 main reasons why I believe it's a complete waste of time and energy. The first one is the time spent. This statistic blew my mind when I found it, but the average fantasy football player spends approximately 7 hours per week managing their team during work hours. So 1 hour of the working day is spent in the office managing your fantasy football team. And nationwide, that is causing a productivity loss of more than $16 billion annually. But just forget the company for a moment. Think about the loss in your productivity. Even if, let's say, you only make $20 an hour and you spend 7 hours a week playing fantasy football instead, that's $140 a week. That's nearly $600 a month that it's immediately costing you in your time. And for many people that partake in fantasy football, it's costing them a lot more than that. So over a 17-week season, this adds up to 117 hours of time spent managing the team. And that's not even including the time spent watching all of the games. So this is time that you could have been investing instead in your personal development, investing in real life skills. Let's also talk about the financial impact. So average players in fantasy football will spend $556 annually on the league fees, the fantasy football subscriptions, the draft kits, the subscriptions to the premium content. And I don't know about you, but I can think of many very productive ways to spend $500. Right, I don't sell a course for $500, and I'm not saying that this is what you need to go and do, but people always say, oh, I see these courses online, it looks like a scam. Well, I've bought some of these courses myself, and they weren't scams. They were a very good use of my time. Or you can go and buy $500 of books, attend a $500 seminar. There are so many ways that you could take this money to level up your own life rather than level up this fantasy life of fantasy players who will never even know who you are. And then nearly half of men who get involved in fantasy football will also end up betting on it and spending at least $500 a season on average on gambling. To me, however, even more important than the time, even more important than the financial loss, is the emotional energy wasted on fantasy football. Men get so much more passionate about a missed tackle or a missed goal than they do about their own failures in life. And the problem is you end up riding the emotional highs and lows that are completely out of your control. They're based on another man's performance, not your own. And I really had my eyes opened when I found this Reddit thread about fantasy football addiction. And people were describing the way that they get involved in fantasy football on an emotional level that completely blew my mind. I mean, somebody wrote this one here. I spend 3 to 6 hours a day on it. I don't think it's necessarily unhealthy, but it's getting bad. I'm a successful adult and literally, this is the best thing I have to occupy my time. There have been times in my life where I don't have much going on socially and hobby-wise, where fantasy football was all I thought about during the season, and losing would make me legitimately sad. And aside from the emotional energy invested and wasted, there's also the escapism elements. As I said at the start of this video, the clue is in the name, fantasy football. Much in the same way that adult movies are fantasy sex, or video games are fantasy army, fantasy joyriding, this is just taking all of the mental energy, all of the imagination and creativity and effort that you could put into something real and putting it down this escapist trash chute where you will never see anything come back from it. And I feel that in many ways, the fantasy football or any kind of fantasizing is just a way to escape the mediocrity of your real life. And that doesn't mean that your life has to remain mediocre. If you would just put your attention on it and see what's really going on, then you'd be able to fix it. And if your own life was extraordinary, if you loved every second of everything that you did, you were so happy with your work, with your family, with your health, would you really care about some guys running around on a field and creating your own pretend team? Maybe for a small percentage of men they would, because they legitimately enjoy it, but there's no way that the percentage of Americans that are taking part in fantasy football now would still be doing it if they had everything else together. So what should you do instead of fantasy football? Well, I think it's time to take that competitive spirit and apply it to something real life. Join a boxing gym, set the goal of in 2 years or 1 year, I'm going to do a fight. Learn to play a musical instrument. If you spent 7 hours a week playing the guitar or the piano, you'd be pretty good in about 6 months' time. You'd be able to play for people and they would enjoy seeing you play and you'd be able to impress people. You'd even be able to Maybe go to a jam session and play live. Or even better, launch a side hustle, launch a business. With that $500 that you were going to spend on the fantasy league, you could take that and get started with something. Start competing in the world of business. Now, I do completely understand the brotherhood and the sense of camaraderie that comes with fantasy football, and I would say that's probably the best thing about it. And fantasy leagues do create a sense of male bonding, I won't deny that. But what I would encourage you to do instead is to create or join a real-life circle of men that pushes you to be better. Not a social group that revolves around fantasy and revolves around going to Buffalo Wild Wings or Hooters, but something that pushes you to be better. Now, personally, I didn't see anything out there as a young man that I was attracted to, so that's why I decided to start something for myself called the Gentleman's Collective. This is an international social club for men built around brotherhood, refinement, and purpose. And if you're interested in joining, there's a video down in the description that you can click and you'll watch, learn a bit more about what we do at the Gentleman's Collective, and you can apply to have a membership call one-to-one with me, and we'll see if you're accepted and if it's a good fit for you. I have to admit, I'm not a big sports person. I don't spend much of my time watching sports, but I will admit that sports can make me very inspired and emotional. When I saw Rory McIlroy win the Masters last weekend, I had to stop myself from crying, I'll be honest with you. And I do think that sports can be incredibly inspirational, as long as you use it in that way, not as a distraction. So instead of studying the athletes for their statistics for your fantasy league, study them for their discipline, for their mindset, for their training. Study their habits, their performance, and use them as role models for your real life, not people or players in a fake game. And I think it's okay to go, once a week to watch your team. Maybe you go and watch a football match with your dad. Maybe you take your little brother to watch a baseball game. I don't have anything against that. I think that can actually be a really productive use of time and bonding with your family and the people that are important to you. But keep it to that 3 or 4 hours a week. And when you watch these games, don't let it take you away from reality. Use it as fuel and inspiration to go and do something amazing in your own field of life. Ultimately, the modern man has 2 choices now. He can direct his energy, time, effort, and focus into a fantasy that's built around other people's successes. Or he can build a life, whether that's a business, a body, a hobby, a family life, that he wants and he desires, and he can actually experience and enjoy that all in real life, because ultimately he's playing his own game, he's not playing the game of others. So it's up to you which one you want to become. But I genuinely believe that you were not born to spectate greatness, you were born to be an active, involved player. Fantasy football can be fun, but don't let that fantasy replace the future that I believe you genuinely deserve. And if you are ready to trade statistics for standards, trade fantasy for purpose, join the Gentleman's Collective and you'll be surrounded by like-minded men with whom you will be doing the most amazing kind of adventures, the stuff that most men only really get to see in movies, and that will help you become the man that you want to be. The link is down in the description, and I'll see you gentlemen in the next video.